Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast powered by eBay Motors Group. It is Saturday the 20th of August and you're joined by myself, Philip Nothard.
And me, Curtis Hutchinson. This is episode 43, season 8 of Motor Trade Radio, bringing you all the chatter that matters. Once again, we've gathered together this week's big car retailing stories across the franchised and independent sectors for you to enjoy all in one place, on demand, on your podcast feed.
Well, a few shout-outs this week, Curtis, and we've got a fantastic midway snippet interview as well. So we should really start off with that, shouldn't we?
We should, yes. Shout-outs, updates. Yes, we've got a lot to talk about before we get to the headlines. So, we caught up with Ian Godbold, a friend of the podcast, and we chatted with him during the week. And we'll actually put the full interview out on Tuesday morning, so you'll see that in your podcast feeds. But Ian, listeners will be aware that he was digital director at Cambria Automobiles until quite recently. Within the last 4 weeks or so, he left to set up his own consultancy business. So we caught up with him to see how he's getting on and also his take on the industry. So that was a great shout, wasn't it?
It was, and anybody that has come across Ian either in person or seen him on any webinars or events that he's been involved with, very knowledgeable, very excitable, and really got some wealth of knowledge. But we won't spoil it. We'll put a snippet at the midway break, and then, like I say, on Tuesday the 22nd, you can pick up that full interview with Ian. And so we'll play that later, but I won't spoil it. But he's got some great advice as well, so one to stay tuned for.
Yeah, definitely. And we've actually been busy over the last few days and indeed the coming weeks recording interviews with various industry leaders. So they'll be popping into your podcast feed probably over the course of next month. And of course, next week we'll have Darren Martin on the podcast talking about values, how they performed over the course of August. So don't miss next weekend's show.
And we've also, you spotted it, didn't you, in terms of update on last week's Great Walls,
Yes.
or the EV brand,
Yeah.
coming to Europe story that we ran. But it has been confirmed this week that the distributor for the UK is IM. So, yes, we have got the Funky Cat coming to UK shores.
Yes, and this was an interesting one because we were kind of speculating last week that Great Wall used to be distributed by IM and Great Wall is introducing its Aura brand in the UK. We were kind of lining it up, putting two and two together. And yes, it was confirmed this week. And funnily enough, I took to LinkedIn sort of saying, we got a scoop on Motor Trade Radio. And Tom Sharp from AM pointed out that they ran the story back in May that Aura is coming to the UK, but they didn't know then about the IM connection. So you may have heard it first here on Motor Trade Radio.
Yeah, and trying to dig around to see what the rationale for the naming is, and there is some naming convention rationale for it, but it leads back to China, and it's relevant to the fact that they've got things called they sell the punk cat, the black cat, and the white cat back in China. So yeah, there's been some translation naming conventions involved with this, but yeah, we'll wait and see.
And as I was saying last week, it was a brave choice of name, but this week I can confirm that that's only part of the name. It's actually the Funky Cat first edition, so which rather suggests there'll be a second and third edition.
Yes, yeah, more to come. And we can't. This week the chatter has really been about the Dispatches program on Channel 4 that aired earlier this week, and the title was "Why is my car so expensive?" and it generated plenty of headlines across the media as that sort of came to air on Monday evening. It's a great put together sensational story with a good friend of the podcast, Ginny Buckley, And she's talking to people like SMMT's Mike Hawes, who's obviously been on the podcast. John O'Hanlon, who we do love, was on there from Wayland's, and Porsche Nissan's boss Andy Palmer, and even Stellantis boss Paul Wilcox was on there. So a very widespread topics were covered, and it's certainly created some chatter this week through the both the industry and through the social channels.
Yeah, definitely. No, it was very emotive. I mean, the title itself is so emotive, isn't it? Why is my car so expensive? It was an interesting take, and there were some, as you pointed out, some great talking heads. And I did have a conversation with John O'Hanlon on LinkedIn, sort of saying that his cameo stole the show, and he was bemoaning the fact that all his good stuff ended up on the cutting room floor.
And I suspect many others would have been as well on that. It was very, very consumer sensational.
Yes,
Let's not,
it was. Yeah.
I think the header of the title of the show didn't quite reflect what the content was. I think they covered everything from new vehicle supply, chip shortages, to write-off vehicles being advertised all the way through to EV. And I think the actual used car price bit was probably about 5 or 8 minutes right at the start of the show, and then it quickly went on to other things. So it was a very broad, very consumer-led kind of show, but worth a watch if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely worth finding on catch up to have a look and see what you make of it. Also, this week we've got the British Motor Show going on. That runs through this weekend, finishing on Sunday in Farnborough. So if you're heading down there, wish you well, and let us know how you get on. And also, there's the agenda has been released for AM Live, which is taking place on the 10th of November at the NEC. So two key industry dates there.
Yeah. So that it's a draft agenda at this stage, but it's getting filled. So it gives you a snippet of the kind of people that are down there, the subjects that they're talking about, etc. But as you'd expect from AM Live, I suspect this year will be busy, with obviously everyone being allowed out now.
Yes.
So I suspect that will be a very, very busy event, and there's a lot of good topics covered from the agenda I've seen so far, and a lot of good speakers. So one to keep an eye out, and I'm sure we'll share more as it gets closer. But again, as always, we do say if you do ever want to get in touch with us, then or come on the show or send us a press release, then do please email us at motortraderadio@yahoo.com. Or you can join the Motor Trade Radio LinkedIn group, or even Facebook groups, and follow us on Twitter, and you will find Curtis and myself on any of those social channels if you do want to reach out to us on anything you want us to cover, stories you want to talk about, or if you do fancy coming on the show yourself to share some information what you've got.
So headlines this week, Phil. Now, I think we've got a full house of all the B2B dealer titles, because we've got headlines from Motor Trade News, AM, Car Dealer, Motor Trader, and also This Is Money. So we'll start in a minute with focus and grip to get retailers through economic challenges. IMI predicts shortfall of 26,000 technicians in next decade. Electric cars have better MOT pass rates than petrol and diesel cars, but we'll look at something associated with that, which is quite an interesting stat about the impact of worn out tyres. And finishing this week with another industry acquisition.
Yeah, so as you say there, we'll head over to Motor Trade News. I don't think we've had a Motor Trade News on for a while. Our friend there, Chris Wright, but this is where they picked up on the story from the latest Cox Automotive Auto Focus. But more importantly, it was advice and insight coming from Owen Edwards at Grant Thornton that was kind of looking at what to expect. As this week we've had obviously the inflation figures out at 10.1%, which is a 40-year high from inflation. The ONS haven't quite decided how they're going to treat the government incentive for energy cap, whether they're going to include it or not.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on that area, but no doubt we're in for a challenging third and fourth quarter, the way it's looking at the minute. But yeah, Owen shares some thoughts on what's happening there, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. Interesting piece, this, and it is again. It's based on your latest autofocus, isn't it?
Yes.
And I guess one of the parts that interests me was some of the tips, because within the piece, you're very much talking about cash is the lifeblood of any business, which we do hear a lot from various dealer groups. They do say that, and that is very much the sort of modus operandi for a lot of dealers now. But there's also some interesting tips here, because these include maximizing gross profits, reviewing current overheads to identify possible savings, and also minimizing the level of working capital to ensure stock turn is as high as possible. And the point about stock turn is particularly interesting, because that's something we spoke to Ian Godbold about as well.
Yeah, and I think that's key. I think we are in a period of challenge. We know that consumer confidence is low. We know that costs are starting to increase across any business, as well as the consumer market. There's a lot of focus on the consumers in terms of that cost of living and the energy cap, but we mustn't forget that this is also hitting businesses. This is the electricity bills, wages. We talk about that unemployment level. We're seeing macroeconomic data that wouldn't normally play out like this. We've got a stable unemployment market, whilst we've got all the potential of a recession and everything going there. But again, it's about, as you say there, Ian does talk about it in his interview. Keep that stock going through, keep that stock cash, get that cash going through the business, keep control of it. And very much, that sort of back to basics message, keep control of everything now. Through this sort of third and fourth quarter of the year. And many people will be listening going, we'll do that anyway. But there are businesses that maybe don't do it or need to do it a little bit tighter. Just keep an eye on that cash flow of the business.
Yeah, and there's an interesting comment from Owen Edwards from Grant Thornton, and a friend of the podcast, who says, while unemployment levels are currently low, inflationary pressures combined with a slowing economy will force companies to take steps to maintain their profitability. And he goes on to say, as a result, businesses will likely face the prospect of cutting their wage bills amid weakening consumer demand. And in addition, the Bank of England has already forecast an increase in unemployment that will in turn further dent consumer confidence. So, yeah, as you say, Phil, there's a lot going on there.
There is, yeah. There's a lot still to play out, and I think nobody really knows which direction it's going to go, because we just haven't got that lead in Parliament yet, and there's what's playing out in other areas. But one's just to keep a close eye on, keep that cash balance healthy, and keep control of costs is key.
So heading over to Car Dealer for the next story, and the headline is used car dealers urged to rethink how to woo customers because of aging stock and cost of living crisis. So interesting story here, and it's based on some comments made by RAC Dealer Network. So very much what's happening in the used car sector amongst the dealers that they're talking to. So the story is really based around dealers are being urged to rethink their customer propositions because of this aging used car stock that we talk about a lot on the podcast, combined with the cost of living crisis, because we're in this almost unique situation whereby customers going into dealers are faced with the prospect of buying older cars at higher prices than they would expect, whilst balancing their household budgets because of the cost of living crisis, rises in inflation, high fuel costs. So there is this perfect storm going on. So this really looks at how dealers should actually approach this in their conversations with customers.
Yeah, because it's I think it's the first time we've had Woo in our headlines, Woo customers there. But it is right. There is a friend that Lee Coomer, who I've known for many years, there, pointed out that there's going to be a situation. There's a lot going on, as you say there, Curtis. With the consumers in terms of that cost of living, and they'll be buying a car out of necessity. To whatever requirements they need that vehicle for, and it's tough. It'll be a tough choice because the decision may be between buying a car or where they go shopping on a weekly or monthly basis. So there's a lot happening there, and like you say, they pay more money for cars. And having as a consequence, buying used cars that are older and higher mileage than they would normally have bought for more money in some cases. So as you say, it's getting that balance right, isn't it, now from a retailers to that consumers.
Yeah, and there's a good point here from ROC Dealer Network in that car retailers really need to find ways of reassuring customers who are being offered these older vehicles at what are historically high prices, while their finances are so stretched. So it really is about those one-to-one conversations.
Yeah, no, and I think it's it is that giving them that sort of confidence and sort of guarantee through warranties and conversation, etc. That's what they're doing. So yeah, I think it's great advice there from good old friend Lee Coomer, and thank you for that. And sticking with the market there, and this is heading over to motortrader.com, and friend of the show, and we must get Steve back on, Steve Nash, who's the CEO of the IMI, and very much leading this on in terms of the challenges facing the sector. And I think we've always had issues, haven't we, in terms of recruitment and apprenticeship within the automotive sector. It's always been a challenge, but really highlighting how extreme this is now. Whether that's to post Brexit, or whether it's to COVID, or just actual, recruitment within attracting people to the sector, is really highlighting those numbers. And there's some big numbers in this, isn't there?
There are, yeah. The headline is IMI predicts shortfall of 26,000 technicians in the next decade. And some interesting research findings here, because the IMI say that despite forecasting a 2% decrease in the number of jobs available in the automotive sector by 2031, their report actually highlights that things like rising employment, replacement demand, due to retirement, migration, and occupational mobility is going to significantly contribute to the expected and what are unprecedented numbers of available vacancies. So, the role in most demand comes as no surprise, really, because it's vehicle technicians, which will account for 16% of vacancies.
Yeah, and it's not getting any better. I think that's the key with this.
Yeah.
It's only getting worse as we sort of go through time and attracting people to the sector. And just reverting back to what Owen was saying before, there is this risk of cost cutting, cost saving world, but doesn't move you on. And where we are at the minute, there may be there's a view that with the shortage of stock in the market and shortage of activity compared to pre-pandemic levels, it's actually masking the problem that we've got. At the minute, that if we had the volume that we had in the pre-pandemic, where would we be at service levels with this level of shortage of technicians and labour?
Yeah, exactly right. And this, you can actually see the report. It's called the Automotive Sector Employment Report from the IMI, and it's interesting that they found that with an aging population, decreased immigration, and they actually throw in accelerating EV sales. Together, it's creating this major skills challenge for the sector, and that'll be affecting a lot of listeners to the podcast today.
It will, and we'll we'll get a hold of Steve and see if we can get him on the show in the future, not too long, and talk through some of the findings in the report and get his view in terms of where the market's heading. Some of the conversations he's having probably with government and other officials in the sector of what's being done about it to help this situation. So, Steve, if you are listening, please get in touch. If not, then do expect an email in your inbox from me very shortly, and we'll arrange to get you on the podcast.
You're listening to All the Chatter That Matters on Motor Trade Radio, powered by eBay Motors Group. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media, available on demand wherever you are on your podcast feed. Now, we've got an extract from the interview we mentioned with Ian Godbold, who we spoke to last week. Ian will be a familiar name to many listeners as the digital director of Cambria Automobiles and also a popular thought leadership speaker at many industry events. Last month, he launched his own consultancy business, and we caught up with him to see how he's getting on and also the trends he's seeing working with other dealers. Ian, tell us about the new venture. I know you've been on social media over recent days and weeks talking about what you're up to, and I think listeners will find this particularly interesting. So you set up the business last month, and you posted on LinkedIn only a couple of days ago that you've been in a whirlwind of meetings with heads of business, high street retailers, marketing directors, and the guys at the coalface, the operators themselves. So who is the business aimed at, and what are you actually offering dealers?
Okay, yeah, well, firstly, I've got to say the fantastic response I've had and the support I've had, especially from everyone in the industry, has been overwhelming, really, and actually it's been quite humbling. As for the business who I'm targeting, well, it's anyone that needs help with their marketing or wants to improve their marketing performance. There are many small or medium-sized businesses that don't or could not afford to have a full-time marketing director, but however could have 2 or 3 days a month and get access to my knowledge and experience. But also larger groups that they want business health check on their marketing to ensure their marketing spend is efficient and look to improve performance whilst decreasing cost per lead and cost per sale, and that's what we've got a track record of delivering. Now, obviously, I've been fortunate enough to work for a startup and then establish a business as one of the most successful franchise dealer groups in the sector. And along my retail experience, we could believe that we can help most businesses. We're offering a full digital agency experience. However, where I believe the market is currently and the biggest impact where we can grow profits and volume is through the used car department. By helping dealers understand and integrate what we call a velocity strategy, focus on speed to market, merchandising, pricing to market based on the vehicle's desirability, or something called retail rating now. And this in turn not only drives used car sales, but increases F&I and of course increases retention rate longer term.
And that's interesting what you're saying about this velocity trading. Do you see that working almost exclusively in used car sales?
It is. I mean, we have, I've put this in place with new cars, but it's generally focused on used cars. And the last 18 months, where we've seen bumper sales, bumper profits. You've not really had to use a velocity strategy, but now it's returning back to the norm where. An example of where you buy a vehicle. Let's say you got £2,000 across that vehicle and you sell it in 30 days, and you turn your stock 12 times. Well, what about if you bought that car, sold that car, and put £1,500 across it, sold it in 15 days, reinvested the money, sell it again in another 15 days? What have you just done? You've increased your bottom line by 50%. You've doubled your stock turn to 24, but you've increased your F&I and you've increased your opportunities to get those consumers back in this time next year for service. And I think that's where the market's heading now.
I mean, it's interesting what you say, Ian, because that kind of sounds like best practice and common sense, but I'm assuming that not everyone's doing that.
They're not, and to be fair, there's your stock shortages, etc., and making good money. People can hold on, but I think now you need to return to that. But you'll be surprised. You still see dealers that'll get a vehicle hold it 45 days and still want to try and get their maximum margin to it. And they said, well, I've managed to sell it and got maximum margin. Well, if you take into account your stocking costs of that, your advertising costs, particularly if you're featuring that vehicle on some of the higher cost channels to market, and then the time it's taken your sales people to actually deal with those leads that have been generated and get that over the line. See, if you work it out, you probably lost money. If you're not selling a car within 30 days, you probably lose money to the bottom line.
And I mean, you kind of ventured out now into sort of what we might describe as the outside world and starting to obviously see, observing what other retail operations are doing. And you talked there about that used car market. We know the opportunities and challenges that are facing the used car sector at the minute in terms of, supply, demand, profitability, etc., and disruptors in the sector. But what other trends are you starting to see, that now you've come out into that sort of outside world from the marketplace?
Yeah, well, I was seeing many of the issues and challenges that I saw during my time as digital director. I mean, I was surprised that there are still some of the basics. The response times, lead handling, and ownership of problems still seem to be an issue. But I say that may be down to the bumper market that we've had, that some of those best practices pre-COVID may have fallen away. What I have seen is huge investment across IT and websites during the COVID period. That has been implemented. But what I would say is it's implementation heavy, but integration light, because what you're seeing is you're not seeing it fully integrated into businesses. And you'll only really achieve that if you've got IT, marketing and operators working together to fully understand what the benefit is to the business, what the benefit is to the consumer. And we call it bridging the digital divide, really everyone working together, because if they don't do that, the investments could be no point, and they'll want to return the investment in the money that they've invested.
As you say, I mean, we will be sharing the podcast on Tuesday. This coming week, Tuesday the 23rd. I think it's 22nd into at the start of the show there, Curtis, but it's Tuesday the 23rd. So yeah, the whole interview is then. But again, it's just a wealth of information into, and he's busy, and he's probably sat. I don't wonder where he'll be this morning, Curtis, listening to this morning's podcast.
Yes, we know where he'll be. He'll be driving a minibus full of young kids going on they're playing football, aren't they?
Playing football, yeah.
Local team, yeah.
Yes,
So he's the designated driver, and they will be shouting all sorts of things at him now, hopefully. Because he's forcing them to listen to the podcast.
Keep your eye on the road, Ian. Keep your eye on the road. Pay attention. But thank you. And again, huge thanks, Ian, for coming on. And I say, welcome to come back on anytime, and have a great day, whatever the result and however you get on. But again, great interview. Do stay tuned. It will be in your podcast feed this coming week. So watch out for that one.
Yeah, and Ian is very keen to hear from anyone in the industry who might want to talk to him about trends, best practices, and best way to get hold of him is either on LinkedIn. He's also very active on Twitter, or just email him at ian.godbold99@gmail.com. So
heading over to This Is Money. And we do like This Is Money's media releases because, the base of the story is electric cars have better Mot pass rates than petrol and diesel, but are more likely to fail for having worn out tyres. Now, I think we covered something around this a while ago on similar sort of findings around the Mot pass rates of electric vehicles compared to their combustion alternatives. But the study does go into a bit of detail of sort of numbers of tests, number of failures, and average test rates and other things. But some interesting findings, as the header does allude to, around tyres. And Hugo Griffiths is in there from CarWow, as is RAC, commenting on this, aren't they?
Yeah, it is an interesting one. And there was a bit of a media spat during the week because I think there was a rival survey done on MOTs from the same data and reaching two different conclusions. So we'll stick with this one because I found this story particularly interesting because of the tyre angle. But if we just look at MOT pass rate, so it's an analysis of 50 million MO test results over the last 3 years, and it found that 82% of fully electric cars pass on the first attempt, while hybrids have an even better success rate at 85%. So just to put that in context, in comparison, the rate for petrol engine cars is 80%, so lower, obviously, and 77% on diesel cars, so even lower. But as I say, what I found particularly interesting was the rate at which the failures were being noticed on both EVs and PHEVs in regards to tyres. So there's whilst the pass rate, you would expect the pass rate to be better than ICE vehicle engines because, after all, there's fewer moving parts in EVs and PHEVs. But with tyre wear, of course, because of that instant delivery of torque, can wear tyres faster. And also, let's face it, the battery packs make EVs and PHEVs a lot heavier than ICE vehicles. So some interesting results there, and really shedding a light on this issue of tyre wear in EVs and PHEVs.
Yeah, no link there with the shedding of tyres. But
No.
you're right, and I think that's the bit with this, isn't it? You are driving a vehicle with additional torque. The 0 to 60s in these EVs are a lot quicker. You do hear a lot of people that quite enjoy that. But again, in a similar note, as you say that, you are got an increased weight as well in this. So, it is where you are getting some savings, as you say there, in terms of that sort of reduced moving parts and potential MOT pass rates due to that. But yeah, you run the risk of increased costs over more tyres and resulting in MOT failures. So yeah, I think the finding's quite interesting on this one, because I think we did see a survey not so long back that kind of threw it the other way a little bit with it, but I think this is really pointing out that the tyres is kind of this area they don't think of on battery electric vehicles as a consequence of the weight and torque, as we've just said.
Yeah, especially as the tyres on EVs are made from more robust compounds with stronger sidewalls. But as it's pointed out in the piece, a lot of this is actually down to driver behaviour. It is that rapid delivery of torque, presumably, especially at traffic lights. I think this is where a lot of the unduly harsh wear is coming from.
Yeah, no, you are right, and they expect. They said that the Simon Williams of the RAC concurred that they respect their higher failure rates for defective tyres may relate more to driving habits than anything else. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting, as you say, as we get more EVs on the road and what happens around that MOT and aftermarket and servicing of these things, and what that long term impact is going to be. So one to watch there. Now, our final story is an acquisition. So we're heading over to AM Online now. This is the CitNOW Group has completed their acquisition of RTC, or real-time communications. But what's interesting with this is that this is the second acquisition by CitNOW in not a very long period of time.
Yeah, it follows hot on the heels of their acquisition of the messaging software platform Web1 on One. But as the AM story points out, this is actually the CitNOW Group's first strategic move since it set out its strategy of boosting its international growth through acquisitions. And that was after it secured new private equity investment from venture capitalists Living Bridge and its current backer Tenzing. So, and this was only last month. So, this really is, the first delivery of, that new financial backing, and really does show where CitNOW is starting to place itself.
Yeah, no, as you say, it's that, I think you pointed it out there, Curtis. It is now declaring what their strategy of growth is with these two acquisitions, and adding different elements to their business. That and you can see why they're doing it. It really does feel right that those two businesses sit alongside CitNOW, doesn't it, and what they do in the sector.
Yeah, because RTC is all about workflow management, and that really does time very neatly. That's a very comfortable fit with CitNOW's other offerings, and it's worth pointing out that CitNOW, they're founded in 2008, but it now claims to have helped generate over 13 million sales globally, with 60 million videos processed and over 10,000 dealer installations across 64 countries. So that's showing the scale and the scope of the CitNOW operations as it starts to expand through further acquisitions.
No, you're right. It was one that we'll keep a close eye on. But that's kind of it for this week. So we've covered, there's quite a lot of headlines that we've tried covering off there. So, as always, please do head over to the sites and see the stories that we've talked about in a little bit more detail, or other stories that have been breaking during that we've been airing the podcast, or other stories we've not covered. And as I say, if you want to get in touch, please do get in contact with us through any of the social channels, or drop me or Curtis an email at motortraderadio@yahoo.com. And again, it's please do tune in on Tuesday this week to the Ian Godbold interview. You will enjoy it. He covers a lot of subjects, and I very much suspect that we'll have him on again very soon to talk about a few other things, since he gets his feet under the table and gets a little bit busier, because he's only been going, what did you say, 4 weeks or something, I think. So
4 weeks, yes.
Yeah. And he's a busy lad, and maybe he'll tell us how we got on down at the British Motor Show as well. So we'll keep in touch from there.
Yeah, and hopefully he's got to the football match by now.
Yes.
That's all for now. You've been listening to the weekly Motor Trade Radio podcast powered by eBay Motors Group. Many thanks for joining us for all the chatter that matters. We're back again next week. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.